The UK's Brexit crisis is escalating as the European Union rejects Prime Minister Boris Johnson's push for a new deal. He wants to redo Theresa May's agreement that gets the UK out of the EU, but European leaders aren't willing to start from scratch.
This leaves Johnson to work with his deeply divided Conservative Party and other lawmakers to come up with a plan, but he's already vowed to leave the EU with or without a deal by October 31st. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Mark Phillips is following the latest from London and joins us now. So, Mark, we're starting to see some reaction from leaders across Europe as this chaos over Brexit intensifies. Why is the European Union reluctant to join Boris Johnson at the negotiating table?
Well, for all of the reasons that they have been reluctant to make changes up until Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, and that is that they're most interested in protecting the integrity of the European Union itself, and that they're very uninterested in giving any country that wants to leave the kind of incentives that would arise should they tell the UK, for example, yes, you can continue to trade with us on positive terms the way that you have, even though you've left the club. Boris Johnson's whole leadership campaign, one some might argue he's been carrying on since childhood, has been based on the idea that he can do what his predecessor Theresa May could not do, which is get the Europeans to say, okay, let's rewrite a deal. In his very first interaction with the EU, the answer came back saying, no thanks, we'll stick with the deal we have, we're prepared to talk positively and all that diplomatic stuff, but basically he's hitting the same roadblock that cost her job.
You know, Boris Johnson is such a curious character to us, I'm sure to you over there too. And I know there's been a lot of discussion as to whether or not his pro-Brexit stance was partially a vehicle to elevate his political profile, and whether he was as committed as he actually presented.
Right.
But now he sort of almost feels to me like the dog that actually caught up with the mailman's truck, right? So now he has it, and he says he's willing to sort of he's willing to go for a hard Brexit.
Right, hard Brexit.
But the implications of a hard Brexit, no one knows. Do we really believe that Boris Johnson is out on October 31st no matter what?
Well, let me take some of your points one at a time. Yes, he famously, on the eve when the nation held its breath while Boris was deciding, we call him Boris, we think we're familiar with him somehow, we're Prime Minister Johnson now, was deciding which side of the great referendum debate to come down on. He, the story goes, wrote 2 newspaper columns. He had a big column in one of the papers here. One for and one against, and came down ultimately on the side of being pro-Brexit, and of course was a major figure in the campaign that produced that narrow victory. The idea of being the dog that caught up with the postman's truck is entirely accurate. The morning of the result of the referendum, a lot of the people who, including Johnson, who were on the pro-Brexit, the Leave side, were quite as shocked at the result as the rest of the country, and to some extent Europe and the rest of the world were. But the problem for him is the arithmetic hasn't changed. In fact, it's only gotten a little worse. Theresa May negotiated a deal with the Europeans. That deal was put before the British House of Commons 3 times and soundly rejected. He has now within his own party an extremely small majority. It's down to 2 seats, and there's an election here, a by-election here shortly, where it may reduce even further. So he's caught in the same numbers game that she was, dependent on a party from Northern Ireland for support, now rejected by the Europeans in terms of renegotiating the deal. And yes, Halloween, the end of October, is the current deadline, and he has said it's a do-or-die date, and either of those possibilities are real.
So what's the reaction there in the UK to Boris Johnson becoming the new PM and his Brexit strategy? What are you hearing?
Well, there's some bemused, if you had to put a single word on it. He is, he's famous as well for having written an essay while still a student, saying that his ambition in life was to be world king. Well, he's got one country so far in line.
Wow.
He is. Bluster is a word that's used associated with him. He had a tour de force performance in his first session in the House of Commons here yesterday. He was on his feet for 2.5 hours taking questions from the other MPs, waving his hands, bloviating in one direction and another, talking about re-energizing the country. He certainly re-energized the front bench of the Conservative Party, and he has formed a cabinet very much in his own image. The test for membership of Boris Johnson's cabinet is whether you support Boris Johnson's approach to Brexit, which is this do-or-die end of October deadline. So he doesn't have the cabinet divisions which Theresa May had to contend with, but he doesn't have anything guaranteeing any kind of victory for his approach to the whole Brexit problem, and the predictions now here range for yet another election sometime this autumn, to even the possibility yet again of another referendum, which of course that election in itself would be.
Hey, you mentioned that his cabinet is sort of reflective of him. I thought I heard the other day that he said that he wanted to have the most diverse cabinet, both ethnically and I assume with women too. And it struck me as an interesting thing for him to say, because over here on the side of the pond, as you probably know, there are a lot of comparisons between him and President Trump, the hair and so on. But I thought it was interesting that he had pointed out that diversity was important to him. But is it?
Well, there's a bit of an internal contradiction with him. He's known as a liberal type conservative. He has less strong attitudes toward the question of immigration, for example, than many on the right of the Conservative Party here have. He's small L liberal and capital C conservative. In terms of diversity, he's brought his Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Finance Minister, is now the son of a South Asian immigrant. Similarly, the Home Office Minister, now the two most powerful positions in his cabinet, are held by people from what you might call immigrant stock here. I think there are one or two more women in the cabinet than they previously were. So on the question of where he stands on the political spectrum socially, he's a bit less right than Tories generally might be, but on the question of Brexit, he's right on the right edge of what that party wants.
Fascinating.
Really fascinating.
Yeah,
also, before Twitter gets mad at me for laughing at him saying he'd like to be king of the world or whatever it was, I was laughing because it's so fascinating to me that somebody would actually think that they could write something about themselves as king of the world.
Yeah.
It's just...
I don't know. I could talk about Boris Johnson all day long.
I know.
He is such an interesting character.
Let's be fair. He was a kid at the time.
Right.
That's good to know.
There's plenty of else to talk about Boris Johnson. Other than that.
Well, Vlad just wanted to be king of the mountain.
Right.
And
my little sister always pushed me off. She's been doing that forever.
Mark, thank you so much.
Pleasure.